Welcome to the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Dame, holistic nutrition coach and speaker. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode here on the Beyond Sugar Freedom podcast. I'm so excited to introduce you to today's guest. Karen Viesta is here with us. Welcome to the show, Karen.
Thank you. Welcome. Or I should say I'm happy to be here.
Well, we just had me on your podcast, so you're taking a minute to flip the role, right? Exactly. I'm interviewing you today, Karen.
Exactly. We've had so many conversations. We have to keep track of which is which.
I know. I love it. It's been so fantastic to get to chat with you. And I am so excited for today's topic and to really share with my audience this powerful support in aging, essentially, and as we go through these different stages of life. So before we get into today's topic and deep dive conversation, I do want to introduce Karen to all of you. For those who are not familiar, Karen Viesta is a certified health and lifestyle coach who works with women over 40 who want to transform their bodies and their lives. She is the founder of Wellegant Woman Coaching and the host of the Wellegant Woman Redefining Midlife podcast, currently ranked number 9 in Apple's list of top 50 midlife podcasts. And after going through her own midlife reinvention, Karen is passionate about helping women in midlife to age powerfully, create extraordinary health and vitality, and make each new decade even better than the last. Oh my goodness, do we ever need this, Karen? I'm so grateful that you're here to share your wisdom with us. I know many of my listeners are in that era, whether they're in their 40s, 50s, even 60s, and really struggling with these shifts as our bodies change and our lives change, our hormones change, all the stuff. So yeah, really, really grateful that you're here and can't wait to dive in deeper with you. Now, I love to start things off, Karen, with all of my guests and experts to really just share a little bit more of your backstory. So would love to invite you to share a little bit of your journey with your health, with your relationship with food. Obviously, we talk a lot about sugar and food here on the podcast. So any of those pieces that you want to kind of bring in, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I was certified as a health coach back in 2012. And I think, I've always had a very good relationship with food, and I've always been active and healthy. And then in 2017, it was the year that I call my perfect storm, because 2 things happened that year that were huge in my life. One was that it was just about the time that I was entering perimenopause, or at least experiencing symptoms of perimenopause. It also happened to coincide, because Mother Nature has a sense of humor, with the year that I ended my 24-year marriage. So in that one year, I had these major physical changes and challenges. And then I also had these major emotional changes happening. And most of that year, I just felt like a hot mess. All of the things that I was doing, all of my, quote unquote, healthy habits, things that had worked before, were no longer working. And I knew that some of it was physical and some of it was emotional. I just didn't know where to begin to deal with any of it. So I did what most women in that situation would do. I went to doctors. I went to therapists. I researched, Dr. Google, as I like to call it. I really was like searching, and I just wasn't able to find anybody who could help me. So I decided that if I couldn't find the expert that I so desperately needed, then I was going to become the expert that I needed. And I went for some advanced certifications in women's wellness. I really deepened into thought work and life coaching. And little by little, over the course of about another, I would say, year, 18 months, I had completely turned my life and my health around. And it was really, I think, because I was attacking it from both angles. I was dealing with the physical stuff and learning what I needed to do to support my body there. But I was also dealing with the emotional stuff, and I was learning how I needed to support myself there. And so what came out of it, in interestingly, I think that the changes became visible and people started saying, well, what supplements do you take? And what are you doing? And you look like you feel so good. And I think my coaching grew really from that because I saw that, there is this unique approach that we need to take in midlife where we're addressing the physical and the emotional together. And B, I just saw that there were so many women suffering and struggling who really needed this information. So, I that's really, how my coaching began and how I developed kind of um, my philosophy and kind of the methodology that I use with my clients.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow. That's a lot to go through and to navigate. I know many of my listeners have probably had years like that themselves. I know I've definitely had years like that where it's like the universe throws everything at you. And the timing of that being right when you were starting to shift naturally, hormonally. What a challenging thing for you to go through and then to turn that into, your purpose. Right? So beautiful. I think that's really where many of us who are doing this work or supporting and working with clients in whatever way, have our own story, right? And why we got there and how we want to help people, navigate these challenges that we went through a lot easier and, a lot smoother than we did. So why, such a beautiful, obviously hearing some of the things that showed up for you, but why do you think, because I can even see this in my practice and with my clients, there's that shift that starts to happen. And, I'm not quite at that age group yet, but I'm getting there. But there's definitely this shift. And we so often joke about it, even in the movies, as like a midlife crisis, right? We see men having midlife crisis, buying Corvettes and getting girlfriends on the side and all this, but women go through this too. So why do you feel like this is actually happening? Like what is actually changing, as we approach this midlife sort of point in our, years on the planet? And why do so many women feel that sense of maybe being stuck or just kind of lost? And these are some of the words that a lot of my clients use.
Yeah, I love that question. And I'm so happy that you brought up the term midlife crisis because I love to think of it as like a midlife breakthrough. Because what I think is happening, you're right. I can't tell you how many women I speak to and how many women I work with who will say that they feel stuck. That word is like, it's the perfect word to describe how we feel, how we can feel at that time, because we look in the mirror and we almost see somebody who we don't recognize any longer, right? There's like a complete change that happens both physically and emotionally. It is not a coincidence that the years between 40 and 60 are the years women experience the most divorce. I think that's just one, additional piece to this. And what it really boils down to is, and I think our bodies illustrate this for us perfectly, is that it's like nature's way of telling us we can no longer operate the way we have been. That if we want to feel good in the second half of our life, we've got to approach it differently. We've got to approach it differently in terms of our health and wellness. We've got to approach it differently in terms of our mind and our emotional life. We've got to approach it differently in terms of our relationships, right? Like it really is nature's way of shifting us because it's hard to make that shift on our own. It's almost like, I felt for me like, perimenopause and that whole physical transition, it enabled me, it forced me really to make all of the changes that I probably wouldn't have had the courage to make if I wasn't put in that position of feeling so terrible, And I think that it represents for many of us the wake up call that we need to say, you know what, I am not willing to go through the next 30 or 40 or God willing 50 years feeling terrible. So I need to learn now what I need to do in order to feel good, in order to have, the relationships that I want to have, and in order to have, an emotional life that is full of peace and pleasure and joy, and that's where the feeling of stuckness comes from, because I think sometimes our needs at this stage do not align with our life. And that misalignment causes us to feel really stuck and, pretty terrible. I mean, it's many women feel in these years pretty terrible, both physically and emotionally.
Yeah. That is so powerfully said, Karen, and everything you said really encompasses what I see with my clients and the women, in those eras kind of going through that. And I'm really just grateful for the way that you articulated that. I think there's a lot going on and a lot that we resist against. I love that idea of the midlife breakthrough, because we do get to choose how we see these. And that's, I really, really resonated when you said that sort of nature's wake up call was kind of what I heard, but nature's being hey, do the things, make the changes that you haven't made. And I'll just add for another layer, what I deeply see in the work that I do with my clients, especially around one of our main traumas being disconnection from our authentic selves that we develop in childhood. We don't know who we actually are because we spent our whole lives trying to be who our parents wanted us to be, what the school system wanted us to be, this perfect version of what success looks like. I need to get this job and the white picket fence and all the things. And then we get to this age where we've done all those things and we're still feeling maybe miserable, or we start feeling disconnected from life, and can start I like to think of it as absolutely nature or the universe kind of pushing you off the ledge to be go discover who you really are. And I think that's such a beautiful gift. And it can also be really scary, right? Of waking up and realizing I don't know who I am. Yeah. I've never had the chance to actually be my authentic self because of the world and society that we live in. And who am I actually? And what do I actually like to do? And what do I actually need? And this energetic and hormonal shift that happens around those ages naturally kind of forces you to do that if you're willing to look at that. I know there are a lot of women who will not. They will continue to stay stuck. They will not see the silver lining or see the breakthrough, right? And
that's why really the work that you do and the work that I do, and that's why it's so important, because I think for the woman who is straddling that fence, right? For the woman who is feeling stuck, who's feeling like she doesn't really, she knows she has to do things differently. She's not satisfied. She's not fulfilled. She's not feeling good, but she's really afraid to step into a new way of being. She's afraid to take the step to leave the marriage, to change the eating habits, to, whatever. I think that hearing encouraging voices, hearing the stories of women who've gone before, who've faced that, who've dealt with it, who've come out on the other side, and who can say, it's even better there than where you are now. That is so hugely important. I think community is everything when you're facing a transition like this, because I think by nature, we all feel like we're the only one going through it. We all feel like, this is a unique experience. And the fact is, it's such a shared experience. Everybody has some version of my story, right? It may not have been that they faced a divorce. Maybe they faced a diagnosis. Maybe they are caring for aging parents. Maybe there was an issue with their kids. But, midlife is a time that there is undoubtedly, a whole community of women out there who are feeling just as stuck. But alongside of that, there's a community of women who, made changes and can act as a guide, can act as that encouraging voice.
So beautiful. I'm so glad you brought that piece in. I'm seeing obviously the parallels with giving up sugar and going on that journey. We need community. We need those people that have walked the path and support us. And I know that's essentially what both you and I do in our practices and with our clients, right? Yeah. We're that person to show that there is another way. And I can't help myself. I really need to add to that, right? That they're just a caveat that there's different types of community. So in specific to what you're saying, right, I think it's important for everybody to remember that you can choose to be a part of a community that feels like they're going through a midlife crisis with you and they're constantly complaining and being victim to this experience of aging. Or you can make sure that you're in a community with other women who have made the best out of this. Like you're leading so beautifully, Karen. This is such a breakthrough and an opportunity to really live my best life, right? So just that's really important. There's, community is such a blanket statement that we hear now and again, but there's a very different types, right? Like, who are you surrounding
Yeah.
yourself with? People who are lifting you up and helping you see this as a gift and an exciting journey, right?
And you have to seek them out,
You do.
because the reality is we live in a very youth centered, youth obsessed culture, right? So the primary voices we're hearing are the voices that tell us it's all downhill over 40, or the voices that tell us that you hit a certain age and then it's, you're it's like the beginning of the end. I like to think of it as a mountain. And I think that, we have been or I should say, we've been conditioned to think of it as a mountain, right? The first half of your life, your 20s, your 30s, you're building, you're growing, you're advancing. And then somehow we think that we hit 40, we're at the top of that hill, and there's only one way to go, and it's down.
Right.
And the truth is that I think there's almost like a second mountain to be scaled, and we have to begin to think about all of the opportunity in the second half of life. Because if you think about it, women are certainly wiser, right? Usually more financially secure. We probably have some fewer responsibilities. Maybe children are grown or at least a little more independent. So maybe we have a little more time. I mean, in many ways, life kind of opens up at this stage, and it can present some beautiful opportunities. But the first thing we have to do, that I think the beginning of all of it, is managing those thoughts that tell us, those messages that tell us that, our world is shrinking and we're declining and life is getting smaller, and, we should just kind of blend in and not stand out. I mean, we have all of these very ageist beliefs that we're confronted with. So I think, as you said, finding a community that believes what you want to believe, finding a group of women who are inspirational, and who aren't going to drag us back to those old, outdated ways of thinking, is really important.
Yeah. Yeah. And it feels like just as I'm listening to you talk, right? This feels like such a rarity, right? We do live in such an ageist culture, and it may feel difficult to find communities, but not impossible. They're there, right? Just like, back in the day where it was felt impossible to find communities of other women giving up sugar. I mean, it's out there, but it is really sad that we do live in this culture that doesn't celebrate aging, right? I know so many indigenous cultures and other cultures around the world, like even in Italy, and right, actually celebrate like the wisdom of the elders as they age, right? Especially women, like these wisdom keepers, and the grandmothers in the family and the great grandmothers in the family are really like looked up to, as opposed to looked down upon. And we have a very looked down upon aging people mentality in our country, right? We put them in a home, just ignore them. They're annoying. They're slow when they drive, like all the things, right? And I mean, this is such a bigger systemic problem that we need to shift for sure. But that is the mentality. And we come up against those beliefs then that feed that when we see that.
I do think it's changing. I actually think this is a very exciting time to be a woman in midlife, because I do think that narrative, although it's slow to change and we still have a long way to go, I do see it shifting. And I always refer to this one meme on social media that you may have seen. It was all over the place a while back. It had this screen was split, and on one side of the screen it had the Golden Girls. Do you remember that show from the 80s?
Yes.
You might be too young. I don't know.
I was just born. I watched it. I watched it.
Did you watch it? Okay.
I did.
So it had the ladies from the Golden Girls, and underneath their pictures it had their ages. So it was like, let's say 53, 55, 57. On the other side of the screen, it had the ladies from the new Sex and the City sequel, the show that was on TV. Same ages, 53, 55, 57. And what it showed, I think, so beautifully is how our perception of a 50-year-old woman, a woman in her 50s, look at what we thought a woman in, or not what we thought, what a woman in her 50s looked like back in the 80s. Right. Versus now. And so I do think that as time has gone on, we are shifting that narrative. And even think about our mothers. Like, our mothers would never be having conversations about perimenopause and menopause. right? It was a taboo subject. It was not something that women shared. So no wonder everybody felt so alone going through it. And now look at how many women are on, TikTok, Instagram, in the media, in the public eye, speaking about this experience and, advising women and guiding women and letting them know what they can expect and letting them know how to advocate for their own well-being, for their own health and well-being. So I do think that we're kind of on the cusp, and I would love to kind of see where we are 10 years from now, because I do feel like that whole narrative is shifting. But at the moment, yeah, I think it has to be a very conscious choice on the part of every woman of like, okay, so what am I going to do with the second half of my life? Am I going to live the Golden Girls version, or am I going to live the Sex and the City version?
Right. Yeah. I love that. I didn't see that meme. That is really, really powerful. And I'm glad that you're starting to notice that. I mean, this is something you pay a lot more attention to than I do. And, as you're talking, I could see that as well. Like, even just the access, as you said, to being able to talk about things, right? Talk about these pieces that shift, I think is really important. So how do then women who are relating with any of this really best navigate these changes? I know you've kind of mentioned a few things already, and I love how you do talk about the blend of the physical, the emotional, the energetic, spiritual, maybe as part of it, because I think so many women, I'm just, again, thinking of my clients here, really focus on just the physical. Oh, my hormones are changing. Right. I'm gaining weight. I can't eat things like I used to eat, or exercise doesn't work like it used to work, and all the things, right? My body hurts, and really focus on the physical piece. So yeah, how do we begin, or what have you seen work really well for yourself and with your clients to actually start navigating the changes here that are happening, that need to happen mentally, physically, and emotionally, right?
Yeah. Well, like I said, I always start with the mental piece, because I really do feel like it drives everything. We have to, I believe, develop a really compelling vision of the future. I talk a lot about the future me, developing an idea of that future you, that woman you want to be in 10 or 20 or 30 years. And what is she capable of? And how does she live? And how does she think? And how does she move? And I think the more that the more clear we get about what we want our future to look like, the easier it is for us to embody that now and bring some of those habits into our life now. And particularly habits of thought. If you want to be a vibrant 60 or 70 or 80-year-old woman, then you are not wasting time thinking disempowering thoughts, right? I mean, if you want to be vibrant at that age, you are laser focused on, I'm going to think in a way that serves me. I'm going to think in a way that inspires me. I'm going to connect with people who, are that encouraging voice, who give that support and who are interesting. I think the more we can adopt those practices and those beliefs now, the faster we will live into that. So that's number one. I do think we have to make a choice, just a decision about what is the second half of our life going to look and feel like. And then we have to be willing to make the necessary changes now. So in terms of the physical, I would say, understand that we can look great and feel great, but we have to do things differently than we did before. We all probably grew up with that calories in, calories out model, right? That told us that if you were gaining weight, you needed to eat less and you needed to do more intense cardio. We need to throw all of that out the window. It has been proven. It just does not work for women in midlife. It just doesn't work. And I heard somebody say, I thought it was such a clever way of putting it. She said, our bodies are not a bank account. They're a chemistry lab. So, and especially in midlife, because what we don't realize or what, traditionally women haven't realized is that when we do that intense cardio, it's raising our cortisol level, right, which will then in turn throw off all of our other hormones. It's sort of like a domino effect. When we eat too little, when we reduce calories, and restrict them, really restrict them, what ends up happening is that we might lose weight, but we're probably losing healthy muscle tissue, which then slows down our metabolism because, muscle is like a metabolism boost for us. So some of these things that we've been conditioned to believe about health and about our body and about losing weight, we have to sort of realize that at this stage of life, it just, things don't work that way. That advice is outdated. And so we need to be, eating better. We, maybe not necessarily more, but we need to be making better choices. We need to be eating more protein. We need to be making sure we're hydrated. We need to be managing stress. Those are things that will go so much farther in terms of helping to balance hormones and just create some harmony in the body at this time when everything is kind of, all our levels are wonky. That's, the best way to lose that belly fat, that, menopause middle, as they call it. And that's the best way to counteract sarcopenia and muscle loss. It's the best way to build bone density and reduce our risk of osteoporosis. So there are so many, amazing things that we can do now to protect ourselves later, but we have to, unravel a little bit of that past conditioning.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there's so many things in that. So deeply well said. I think I'm even, as you're talking, thinking of how many of my clients and women that I know will go through this transition, not having the support, not knowing that it's time to change, resisting the change, and then just binging on sugar because they feel so miserable, right, about themselves, right, which is just going to make things worse. And we really deep, and I see a lot of women having these emotional eating patterns or unhealthy habits, whether it's pounding wine, right, or like trying to cope because this is so uncomfortable because we're resisting it, right? And I think that's like really what I'm hearing in your message, right, is actually understanding this is going to happen to all of us. We are going to age. There's no point in resisting it, but you can choose to actually embrace it and make the changes and shifts that you need to make it your best, right? And to feel your best as you do that.
Yeah. I also, compare it a little bit to pregnancy in that, when our bodies were changing, when we were pregnant and we could no longer, do certain things. We could no longer drink alcohol. We could no longer, over drink caffeine. There were certain changes we had to make, but we didn't look at it. Many of us didn't look at it as a loss. We didn't grieve those changes. We said, you know what? This is going to be great for me and my baby. So I am 1,000% willing to make those changes because the end result is I'm doing something healthy for me and my baby. Right. And I think, the more we can adopt that outlook at this time, the easier it is to make some of those changes. Now, I know you work with women on, sugar addiction and emotional eating. And I think it's a similar, I think you would probably agree that our bodies are always sending us messages. I know there came a point where I couldn't drink wine without having disrupted sleep. If I have that glass of wine with dinner, I am sure to be up in the middle of the night just because the effect of it on my body now is very different from what it might have been, 10 or 20 years ago. But rather than look at it like, oh, I can't have wine and I really want that glass of wine, in my mind, I choose to see it as, oh, I am going to feel so good after a solid 8 hours of sleep tonight. Yeah. Like, I think so much of it is just reframing it and focusing on the positive at the end of it, focusing on, if I make these changes now, look at how much better I'm going to feel later on, because that's our body's way of telling us, alcohol is just not great for you right now. Alcohol is messing with your hormones. It's messing with your metabolism. It's just not feeling good in your body anymore. So why am I going to fight that? If that's my body telling me this is not good for me right now, then, that should, if anything, be even more of a reason to make changes, because our ultimate goal is always to feel good, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I know many of my listeners too, like hearing this, I mean, that makes such powerful sense. And at the same time, there's also this layer of having to now give up our like go-to for comfort. And I know a lot of my clients struggle with wine or sugar, right? And they're like, now my body is telling me I need to stop eating this, but I can't because I have no other sources of joy in my life or comfort or connection, or like there's a lot of pieces that we tie into some of these things, right? So there's, there's not just one angle, and that is a piece that we need to overcome as women as we start to recognize, okay, I can't get away with, drinking the wine at night anymore and, waking up feeling horrible every morning. And what an opportunity. I mean, I just want to add my reframe to that is what an opportunity to finally remove these crutches and find healthy ways of supporting yourself in life's ups and downs. And when you feel like you need comfort and all of these places, it's an opportunity if you choose to see it that way. Right. And I think you and I both are in that mindset of choosing. And at the same time, I do want to acknowledge, like, I think I really strongly believe that it is important to let that part of us speak that is grieving, that is wanting to throw an adult temper tantrum because their body is no longer working like it used to when they were 20. I think there's some beautiful honoring here of this shedding and this kind of rebirth, right? Yeah. And we can focus so strongly on the amazingness that's about to come, but also I feel like we need to spend space and time to also allow ourselves to grieve the younger version of ourselves that is no longer here with us, right? And maybe even complain a little bit about it. Maybe even have a little bit of a temper tantrum, like, this sucks. I can't have wine before bed anymore. Right. In a way that's like healthy and contained, not in a way that you become whiny every day about these things. Yeah. But there's an honoring there that needs to happen as we shed and grieve and shift fully into this new version.
Yeah. And I think when we have, to kind of circle back to something we had talked about earlier, when we have that really clear, compelling version of our future self, it makes it easier to do that. It's almost like rather than feeling like we're leaving something familiar behind and we're stepping into the unknown, we can feel like we are leaving something behind, but we're being drawn forward into this next exciting place. Yeah. So, that's why I really feel like the women who feel the most stuck, the women who grieve those changes the most, and have, and struggle with giving up the sugar or the alcohol or reframing wellness and fitness and everything, are the women who are just clinging to that. They're very past focused. They're clinging to that past version of themselves because they don't have the focus on the future. That's drawing them, that's compelling, that's exciting, And so I really feel like having that future focus makes all of what we're talking about just so much easier.
Yeah, I so love that. That really resonates. And that's such a beautiful, important message. I feel like, I need to use that. I'm thinking areas of my life where I'm like, I really need to, I haven't sat down and like future casted. And that is so important, right? To have things to look forward to. I'm someone who loves having things to look forward to. So being able to, not work as hard, go on more cruises. Like, I don't know, what I want to travel more, these amazing things that may be unfolding.
And we tend to do it in the short term, right? We tend to think about like, when we are future casting, we'll think about like the year ahead, maybe at the new year, you're thinking about what you want to do in 2024, but it really is interesting to think farther out, and to really consider, who it is that you want to be at the deepest level, like what is my character? How much confidence do I have? Like, how am I living? How am I thinking when I'm 70, versus now? Like it really does, I think, make the transition a lot less scary.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's less unknown, right? We can then have that sense of like, I know what's coming. It's going to be amazing.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So what would you say then? I mean, this is all just amazing. I'm loving this conversation and can imagine many of my listeners possibly navigating some of these things that you're sharing, but maybe not quite in the right ways. So I'm curious, like, what are some of the biggest maybe pitfalls or mistakes that you see women making when it comes to this transition, or when it comes to even just their well-being in general? I mean, that's kind of a catchphrase, as they start, going through this process.
I think the biggest pitfall is just the sense of disempowerment, the sense of hopelessness. I don't think many women realize just how many things we can control. The whole time feels very everything feels out of our control, right? We're emotional, so our emotions feel out of our control. Things are happening to our body that make us feel out of control. A lot of the messages we get in our culture and in our society kind of make things feel very confusing and scary, and we can feel very out of control there. So I think, the biggest pitfall is falling into a state of hopelessness and failing to recognize just how much control we actually have. Because, there don't need to be a lot of big sweeping changes. I have a whole guide that I'm happy to share with you and your listeners called the Midlife Glow Up Guide. And essentially it outlines, a series of small, very manageable changes that we can make that, if we do them consistently over time, will absolutely transform our health and the way that we look and the way that we feel. But none of them are big sweeping changes. And, if I go back to my own story, I was not in a place emotionally where I could have done a complete overhaul on my whole life, and make radical changes to my nutrition and my fitness. Like I was so depleted by the end of that year that all I did was, as I started learning more about what was going on in my body and what I needed to do to support myself, I just made these very minor shifts. But, as you know, things compound over time. And so even though they were minor changes, a year later, boy, I was in a completely different place, physically, emotionally. Every area of my life had improved. So I think that that's really, and again, I'm happy to share that guide with your listeners, but I think that we should feel, we can feel empowered that, okay, maybe there are these things that I can't control. Maybe there are these chemical hormonal changes going on in my body, but there are all these things that I can do to ensure that I'm giving my body the nutrition it needs, that I am detoxifying hormones in a healthy way, that I'm moving my body the way it needs to be moved, that I'm managing my mind the way, I need to create a life of peace and joy. And I think that when we kind of take our power back in that way, it does have that effect of just transforming every area of our life, even things that are not directly connected to what we're doing. You do kind of just see this ripple effect where everything seems to feel better.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so beautiful. What I'm really hearing in a lot of what you're sharing is this simplicity. Like we're coming back to, I think so many women, and I've caught myself here before too, especially once we get into any sort of curiosity around health and wellness, it is so noisy out there. It is so overwhelming. And the media and the Instagram and the TikTok and all the podcasts, right? Yeah. Like with all these great ideas can kind of create this belief that being healthy should be really complicated. I've got to do all these things and then all these things. It's like a full-time job, biohacking and do this. And I got to go for this run and meditate and sauna and really, like, I love your message, and what I hear and what you're sharing is really just like simplifying it, right? And actually being healthy is really simple. We need to just move our bodies, hydrate, sleep, right? Eat good, nourishing foods, right? Like it doesn't have to be so complicated, nor does it have to be all at once. I think a lot of my audience will really resonate with that, understanding that lasting change actually takes time to implement. So maybe this month you're just starting to walk more, right? And next month you're starting to drink more water, right? And as you said, it's funny, I'm thinking of the bank example you shared earlier, because compound interest. Now we're actually compounding the interest of all these things that you're investing in yourself with, right? And they can be small and still have a big impact.
No, for sure. And I think, if women do kind of take back their power, I think that's really a huge message in my work, is just taking back our power. We live in an information age, and that's a wonderful thing. I mean, look, it allows you to do what you love and me to do what I love. There are many wonderful things about being in this digital age, but there's so much information that it can be so overwhelming for a woman to go online and try to navigate her way through, all of this and make sense of it. And of course, there's so much contradictory information. So I think it really boils down to, three things. And these are the things I focus on in my coaching programs. You need to know that you're operating with good information. You need to either be willing to vet the information yourself, or you need to find someone who is really knowledgeable about things and can guide you. So the information, the quality of the information that she's getting is super important. You also need a process, right? We can't just be flying blind. We need to know, a step by step, and that makes it so much easier. And then the third thing we need is just motivation. We need, to feel inspired every day when we get up to make these changes, to move through that process. And I think that that's really sort of like the magic formula. Like, if we've got good information, we've got a good process to follow, and we have motivation and inspiration on this journey, that, will carry us through. It will help us to take all of our power back.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so wonderful. I tap in a lot to that very similar message, I think, for women at any age. I mean, we need to take our power back. It is time, and we have the right to do so. And we live in a really fascinating time where we can actually do that for the first time in centuries, right? As women, speak our own truth, stand up for ourselves, set healthy boundaries, right? Leave our husbands if they're not, respecting us. We can do these things now. And I think that's really exciting. And it can be also scary, because we're trying to figure it out as we go, for sure. Okay, this has been fantastic. We talked about this on my episode on your show. We could talk forever.
I know.
This is so helpful. I'm going to keep this episode handy for when I turn 40 or when I start struggling,
That's right.
which I don't see coming, because I've been working on this mentally for myself so long. But I'm sure may sneak up on me too. So as we wrap things up, Karen, is there any final message that you want to share, or any piece that we didn't get to cover today that you really want to share with the audience?
I guess the only message I ever want to leave people with is just that age does not equal decline, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, that this is an amazing time to be a woman in midlife. And I think that the second half of our life has so much opportunity there. And it's really just a matter of reframing our thoughts around aging. So that would be the message that I would encourage any woman, over 40, to just really be mindful that the second half of your life can be absolutely extraordinary. It can be our healthiest, most, joyful, pleasurable, radiant years. If we decide to make it that. And it really boils down to just a simple decision. Yeah.
Wow. That's so powerful. And I really love that message you shared earlier too, about we do have more control than we think. I know there are a lot of women who feel that disempowerment of, it's just going to happen because I'm 50, right? Versus, no, I can actually do something about this. I don't have to just subscribe to this way of being and feeling and declining, right? I can be, this can be amazing. I'm excited. I just having this conversation with you. I mean, I am so excited to turn 40 in a few years, and 50 and 60. I know it's going to be an amazing time of my life.
There are lots of gifts in it.
Yeah.
Truly, there are lots of gifts in it.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much, Karen, for sharing all of this today. If my listeners want to come and connect with you, look into your programs, work with you, where can they find more about you online?
Yeah, so my website is wellegantwoman.com. And on the website, I have many free resources, one of which is that Midlife Glow Up Guide that they can access there. I also have a podcast, the Wellegant Woman Redefining Midlife is the full name of the podcast, and it's on Apple and Spotify and all the places. And of course, Instagram and social media. I'm all around.
Amazing. You're on the places, all
I'm in all
the
the
grams.
places.
Yeah.
That's right.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being here, Karen, and everybody for tuning in to another episode. This has been so much fun, and I hope that you got a lot out of this and are feeling rejuvenated and revived and re-excited and ignited about these next phases of your life. And definitely go connect with Karen if you want to keep the conversation going. And yeah, we'll see you all in the next episode.
Thanks, Danny. It was great being here.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Thank you for tuning in to another episode. If you're loving what we talked about today, please remember to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone you love. And if you're ready to dive deeper into discovering your root causes and patterns that are keeping you hooked on sugar, be sure to check out our brand new free workshop series that will help you kick emotional eating for good. Find the link to download this free series and other amazing resources in the show notes below.